Hello. We want to look today at the beginning of the book of the 8th century prophet Amos, a book that many scholars will suggest is written during the 8th century. We want to look at it and take a look at its socio-historical context and then begin to examine it from chapter 1 and correlate it with how it is similar and different from our present reality. One of the first things that we want to look at is the words of Amos, a sheep breeder from Tekoa, who prophesied concerning Israel in the reigns of King Uzziah of Judah and Jeroboam, son of Joash of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. And one of the first things we want to look at is this summoning of God. That this summoning of God comes to this sheep breeder or vine dresser of the area of Tekoa. So what we have is an individual, if we look at it, who has what we call, and many scholars will say, access. This is a property owner, this is a vine dresser, this is a sheep breeder. This is an individual who has access in an agrarian culture to economic resources and viability. And so here it is that God interrupts his life. In this time, we're starting to see God interrupting, or we should see God interrupting because of what is transpiring. One of the things is, when we look at scholarship, is that latifundalization, or the acquisition of land, is becoming predominant in that culture. Individuals now are making large estates. They are taking ancestral land and making estates. Well, we're seeing that inside of these foreclosures in the United States. We're starting to see it as individuals who have wealth and individuals who have land. They are constantly taking more and more land. And as this land is being taken, individuals are being displaced. And it does not seem that the church and many individuals are talking about how these different institutions, as we talk about our system, we talk about the banks, we talk about all of our economic system right now, taking from individuals who are struggling. And so when you look at latifundalization, or the taking of land, you start to look at it inside of the increase in militarization. You start looking at the political shifts that's taking place. So when Amos is summoned, Amos comes up and says, what you are doing is contradictory to the covenant that God instituted with Israel, because there are these commandments, or what we call commitments, that we embrace with God. And these commitments said we will be concerned about our brothers and our sisters. Well, right now, it does not seem that these individuals, particularly in most of these economic institutions, are concerned. Anytime somebody raises the consciousness, they are socialists. They're given these other stereotypes, rather than looking at the Bible and saying, no, what we're trying to do is build community. That these individuals have fallen on difficult times. Not these people are lazy, not these people are sorry, but things have occurred inside of our society. It is interesting to me that the banks have been receiving, or have received, from our government subsidies and resources, but will not go back and even consider helping families who have experienced a shift economically in our culture. They won't even consider it, even though they're going to go back and sell it to someone else and make this money and sue these other people. So they're making hand over foot while families are being lost. God is right now trying to call the church and call prophets, prophetic voices, ministers to stand up and to say, wait a minute, there is a problem when you take the revenue that supposedly has been stockpiled in our banking, in our system, in our federal system, giving it to the banks, but the banks will not disseminate it to the people. That would be contradictory to the Hebrew culture, where that individuals would then give their money into these temples, through tithes, through offerings, so that the people widows and orphans and individuals struggling might have access so that they will not be dehumanized, so that they will not lose their humanity. Right now, we are taking individuals' humanity, and there seems to be no voice. It seems that we are not awakening our consciousness to challenge the perceptions being given by our government, being given by the Tea Party, and any of the rest of these groups, but also to challenge ourselves. One of the other aspects of it in the liberal part of their argument is that individuals should be assisted, and really what they mean is enabled. We must challenge ourselves, those of us who have struggled with being marginalized, to begin to look inwardly and actualize our talents and our abilities, but we also must look to empower our own communities. Because if we begin to understand how these systems are interconnected, we can begin to establish our own systems of empowering each other. We can begin as churches, as communities, as different institutions to purchase our own property, our own land, set up our own system where we can help families, where we can help individuals develop not only businesses, but manufacturing. We do not have to just rely on someone else. We have to begin to look at ourselves and create an alternative economic system, create an alternative. What we would talk about, as Jesus would say in his New Testament understanding of the Beatitude, a new reality of interacting with each other. We don't have to continue to sit in a system that we know that the system victimizes us. Now, when you look at this, he turns around and moves up during a time of God's calling prior to a governmental shift, a time of prosperity, but also, if the text is correct, the years before an earthquake, before there is this shaking and this shifting and this traumatic incident that will occur to bring upheaval. What we're seeing now is a major reshifting inside of our nation. We're seeing a polarization. We're starting to see where the disparity between the economic 2 to 5% and the rest of the nation is at an all-time wide gap. We have to turn around and say, wait a minute, we want to challenge this. We want to challenge ourselves by not participating, by giving all of our resources to some of these multinational corporations. We have to start looking and challenging our children to take a look at the systems of injustices with the criminal justice warehouse system, not to be participants in that. But if we're going to, then we got to give them alternatives. If you're going to tell a child to go to school and the school system is not working, then we have to come up with different ways of enhancing their education and then giving them opportunities so that the education is viable and worthwhile. If I'm going to tell you not to sell crack on the corner or not to begin to survive, I've got to be able, and this is for the churches and this is for us Christians and these different institutions, we have to come up with ways of establishing a mechanism or an instrument whereby individuals can find viable ways of surviving and thriving. It's not just enough to survive, but to thrive in this agrarian culture. If you start taking away ancestral land and the ability, because it is an agrarian, to produce produce, these individuals will starve. Their families will starve. A loss of identity, a loss of connectedness will then they will experience. So therefore, there is a great deal that is going on as Amos comes up and says, wait a minute, we must challenge this system because we are losing our connectedness, we are losing our ability, we are losing a lot of whom God has created us to be. And as being human, we have to begin to say we need to empower individuals. Since churches and other institutions have access to wealth, how then do we disseminate this wealth in a way that all human beings can be enhanced? We have to stop sitting up here saying we're going to throw it in this trickle-down system where that you put it in the top tiers, regardless if that's the preacher, regardless if that's the wealthy, in the hopes that it might someday fall and come down. It does not work that way. So now we're starting to begin to challenge, or we should begin to challenge, how do we as a community, how do we as a church begin to talk about claiming our voice, hearing the summoning of God. And once we hear this summoning of God to do what he does, he begins to make a sacrifice. How do we make a sacrifice and a risk that would challenge the powers that be? Because he'll go up from Tekoa up to the big city of Jerusalem and challenge it. He has to take this risk because God has summoned it. How does the church risk speaking truth to power when our hands are in the power broker's hand? We have to step back and say, are we an authentic voice or are we not? Are we really ready to challenge a power system like not only the United States, but around the world, these multinational corporations, these individuals who really are controlling? Are we really ready to take that risk? Here it is, the prophet Amos is ready to do that. He is ready to challenge these systems, challenge these individuals, challenge this governmental structure to say this is not how and who God has called us to be as a people, as a nation. We need the strength of a Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We need the convictions of a King. We need the strength and fortitude of a Malcolm to stand up and to say no. There are many other individuals in diverse religious beliefs and systems and throughout other ethnicities and nationalities who say, no, I'm going to sacrifice so that the group or so that the community and the nation will be better. Our challenge now is not to just sit in churches and jump up and down and holler about it's coming to me, it's coming to me, it's coming to me. But to begin to start talking about how it is going to flow throughout our communities so all of our children might benefit, how all of our children might be educated so that a future generation will not sit back and be victimized and constantly be victimized by the present structure. I would not like to see our churches continue in this what we call performance, because all we're doing now is entertaining. All we're doing now in many instances, not all churches, but in many instances, all we're doing is giving a lottery mindset, which for me means this. You give this investment of money in the hopes that you get a greater reward without really investing yourself. So we're throwing money at the problem without investing ourselves in what's our strategy, what is the solution. Amos will begin to start talking, not just critiquing, but he'll start talking about a strategy, which for the next weeks, I hope that we will be able to investigate, to talk about what strategies we need to implement in order that not only the church can reconnect and gain its viability, but so that our communities will begin to reclaim their power and to begin to step forward and say, no, we are not simply here to make sure you're wealthy. We're here so that our children will be able to have a future and an identity and access to the wealth and the resources and all that God has entrusted. Thank you for your time.